Hey, what's going on, people? It's your boy Macadon, and I'm back with another video. I know I've been on hiatus for a while. I've been I've been somewhat quiet when it came to the verdict or the decision when it comes to the Michael Brown, Trayvon Martin, Eric Garner cases. I've been mainly just been very observant of supporters of the Trayvon Martins, the Michael Browns, the Eric Gardners, and also the supporters of the Darren Wilsons, the George Zimmermans. Everybody been able to give their opinion, their take, their side on the issues, on the incidences, and I figure, okay, now it's time for me to give my take on it. But what really prompted me to want to make this video is when I watched the Kelly Files on Fox News with Megyn Kelly, and she was having this dialogue with the CEO of the National Urban League. His name is Mark Morial, and of course, the dialogue was about the Eric Gardner case. So, I want you guys to check out the little snippet that I cut up and placed here. Just a little bit of the dialogue that was going on between Megyn and Mark. The points and the arguments that they were making. And if you want to catch the full video of its entirety, just click on the link that's on the screen right here and you can see it. But this is what mainly was going on between Megyn and Mark. Check it out.
Start with this. What is the evidence that what happened to Eric Garner and what happened to Michael Brown has anything to do with race? Maybe it could be the national spotlight that was on those cases as opposed to the race of the policeman and the person who died.
For a good prosecutor who is experienced, that should not really matter. What should matter is fulfilling the responsibility.
The same examples, opposite examples, could be cited the other way. I mean, just doing brief research before we came to air tonight, I can cite for you several examples of a situation where a black police officer killed a white man and no charges were brought. So black cops killing white men, no charges resulted in those cases. Is that racism against whites? And then let me finish my point, and I'll give you the floor. Just today, a white police chief who fatally shot an unarmed black man in South Carolina back in 2011 was charged with murder. And we could go on. When there are situations where white cops shoot and kill black men and the white cops are charged. They're few and far between where a white cop is killing a black man, but I can cite to you examples where it's happened and the white cop is charged. I can also cite to you examples where the black cop killed a white man and he's not charged. What is your evidence that the result in these two particular cases had anything to do with the fact that the dead men were black?
You seem to be really hung up on this question, but let's look at the cases at hand.
I'm not hung up on it. You're hung up on it. The Congressional Black Caucus that says black and brown lives don't matter. Cops can kill with impunity.
Opportunity to finish.
I'm defending the charge you just made.
Yeah, but you're going to have to give me a chance to finish.
You go ahead.
So let's look at these cases at hand. The cases at hand did not yield justice. And that's why I am pleased that the Department of Justice and the Attorney General are going to conduct.
I get that. You're entitled to your opinion on that and to push for an additional investigation. And that's absolutely, you're right. But to say that this is a racist situation, as Al Sharpton has suggested, as Mayor de Blasio has suggested, as many others have suggested, requires evidence.
What
I've heard so far from you is, well, they asked for more evidence.
What would it take for you to acknowledge that race is an issue? Maybe you don't want to acknowledge that race is an issue. I'd like to know the proof. Just tell me. Let us say this. On this issue, we have a difference of opinion. And as Americans, we have a right to have a difference of opinion.
I would like to know the evidence.
With respect to how this occurs. And I think there are just too many instances. Yeah, there's always other cases. And to some extent, whether a police officer, regardless of his color or her color, in a case where they, in fact, take advantage of a citizen, that case should be handled. Those people, if probable cause is met, should be prosecuted. And I think the outcry you see, Megyn, is not operating in a vacuum. And it's not just one or two civil rights organizations. This is an organic protest.
But where are the protests over the fact that 91% of all blacks who were murdered in 2013 were killed by other blacks. 7% were killed by whites. 91% of the murders committed against black people were by other black people.
So let me tell you about your right-wing talking points.
It's not my right-wing talking points. Those are statistics and facts,
If you want to know where the outrage is, come with me on Sunday to 100 African-American churches around the country where there's a conversation about violence, police violence, black-on-black violence.
Right.
That just may not be a part of the community that you see, where there's outrage,
I'm asking,
where there are rallies, where there are
I
outrage
haven't
and
seen
rallies.
the rallies like this
Because you're
over
not
the
a part-
black-on-black
you
crime,
are
which
not-
is 91% in New York City and nationally.
The protests are about the lack of accountability by the system, Megan. When black people take advantage of other black people, prosecutions take place in many of those cases. This is about the lack of accountability. A police officer wears a uniform. They're sworn to uphold the law. They're public servants.
And when
they
grand
should not
juries
be,
feel-
and they should not be above the law.
Agree.
I
My
don't believe
audience
this again.
wants
I
to hear
believe-
the evidence.
I believe-
They're wondering why we're seeing
believe-
people in the street condemning the law enforcement, condemning this is a white versus black thing.
No one is saying that. The protesters on the street, Megan, walk down into
Mayor
New
de
York.
Blasio
They
said
are-
this is about racism.
Many of these protesters are white. They are
Mayor
black.
de Blasio said this is about
Megan,
racism. The
go-
Congressional Black Caucus
let your
said this is
cameras-
about black lives being
Let
taken with
let your
impunity.
cameras go down on the street, and what you're going to see is a mixture and a tapestry of America protesting in connection with this case. This protest, the outcry you see, is not just black people. The victims
I'm
may
not
be
saying it
African
is.
American.
I'm not saying it is. It's the message
let's-
that this is a white versus
Well,
black
if
thing.
you disagree with it, you're entitled to disagree with it. But let's look at the movement.
I'm not offering my personal opinion,
The
sir.
movement-
I'm asking for you to establish where race falls into this matter. But I think
How
we've
many
had that discussion.
times-
We're going round and round, and it's
How
great
many
to
times
see
do
you,
I have to
as always,
answer?
Mark.
Thank you.
Thanks
Have
for
a
being
great
here.
day.
And so basically, that what was going on. That was the dialogue between those two. You know, Megan arguing what's the evidence of what happened to Gardner and Brown had anything to do with race, and how she was stating that, you know, she doesn't believe it has anything to do with race because on the other side there are black officers that have shot unarmed white men and they haven't been charged. And then there's a case out there in South Carolina where there was a white officer who shot an unarmed black man. He was charged. And she was also arguing about how the Congressional Black Caucus says how they bringing up the narrative of, you know, they're making it about race because they say black lives don't matter. Cops can kill black people with impunity. And, you know, she just had this idea that because it's not very blatant, it's not in your face, the situation with Garner and Brown didn't have anything to do with race. And of course, she brought up the old cliche or the narrative about what about black on black crime? You know, why are protesters making such a big fuss about the Eric Gardners and Mike Brown cases, but yet they're kind of quiet about when it comes to black on black crime? Why then they're protesting against that? And to Mark's point, you know, he was saying about how the prosecution shouldn't let race or the national spotlight dictate their decisions when it comes to indicting these officers. And Mark, he did say that he believes cops of any color, whether they're white or black, they should be prosecuted when they take advantage of civilians of any race. And he also said basically, you know, when Megan was bringing about the black on black crime, making the black on black crime argument, he was basically telling Megan, hey, well, you know, if you come with me to all the churches on Sundays, you will see that people are protesting, that people are speaking out against the black on black crimes. But the major media outlets, they're not going into these neighborhoods to see the outrage. You know, you really don't. You really see it locally. I mean, if you take a situation in, say, a situation down in Huntsville, Alabama, where there was a black on black crime, and in that neighborhood people are protesting, you really don't see it on a national scale, but you probably see it locally on the local news. So just because it's not being put on a national plateau doesn't mean that it doesn't happen. And Mark also made the point about when it comes to these protests, was that the protest that's going on with the Eric Gardners and the Mike Browns is that there is a lack of accountability of the system, meaning that police officers are getting off with shooting unarmed civilians. They're not getting charged for it. Yeah, there are some exceptions to the rules when it comes to the cop from South Carolina, but most of the time, police officers are getting away with murder, so to speak. And when you look at black on black crimes, when you look at black offenders who have been caught within 48 hours or have been charged, Mark was saying that the prosecution, it does take place when blacks take advantage of other blacks from a criminal aspect. So that's basically what the conversation was between, Megan and Mike. So, I mean, I really felt like Mark did make the point to acknowledge that cops of any color should be prosecuted. He did mention when it comes to black on black crime, prosecution do take place when blacks do take advantage of other blacks. And he was also saying that the prosecution shouldn't let race or the national spotlight dictate their decisions when it comes to indicting the police officers. Just listening to the conversation between, Megan and Mark, I really come to the conclusion, and I'm sure there's others have come to the conclusion, but it really does show that racism will always be a never-ending debate. A never-ending debate. Because on one side of the coin, you have people who feel like racism is in your face, is very blatant. And then on the other side of the coin, you have people who believe that racism is very covert. And to be honest with you, racism, it is covert because, racism. It isn't legal to be racist. I mean, it isn't legal to practice systematic racism, being very blatant with it. You can't be like, oh, well, we're pulling you over because you're a black man driving a nice car in a fancy neighborhood. Oh, we're not going to give you the job because you are black. Oh, I'm going to beat you down because you are a black person. I mean, you can't legally do that without being punished for it. However, there is such a thing as covert racism when you see that there are laws that are against a certain lifestyle or usage that is more known to be maintained by people of color versus the other group. Yes, racism is very covert. When you want to charge people for sagging in their pants, when you're known that a specific group of people have been known to do it more than others, then yeah. I mean, in each race, there are some quote unquote ratchetness that goes on. But when you focus on the ratchetness within one group and you want to implement laws to keep them from doing it, then yes, it's very covert. When you want to initiate stop and frisk, but you're only pulling over people who happen to be of a darker skin color more than any other group, then yes, it's very covert. When white collar criminals are not given the same sentence as street criminals, yes, it's very covert. When you want to charge a particular group who's known for distributing or using crack cocaine more than powder cocaine, and the group who's known for using powder cocaine more are not given the same charge, then yes, it's very covert. So yes, there is such a thing as covert racism. So, as I was watching this, I was saying to myself, alright, so Megan has pointed out that there have been black officers who have shot unarmed white victims. So I said, okay, alright, let me look it up. Let me just see. I'm just curious. Because, like I said, on different sides of the coins, there are people who shout out this is racist. There are people who shout out this isn't racist, because there have been situations where the exact opposite has happened, meaning white officers shooting black men. There have been black officers who shot white men and have been cleared. So I said, okay, all right, let me look it up. Let me see what's going on. So I was able to find two cases. One that happened down in Mobile, Alabama, on the campus of the University of Alabama. The black officer's name was Travis Austin, and he was cleared by the grand jury for shooting an unarmed white victim by the name of Gil Collar. Okay. Then I also looked up another case where a black officer by the name of Robert Arnold, he was cleared by the grand jury for shooting unarmed white victim James Whitehead. James Whitehead was a Marine, so he's been cleared. You guys can look it up for yourself. Robert Arnold, Travis, Trevis Austin. Or look up the victims' names. Gil Collar, Gilcollar, James Whitehead. You guys can look it up for yourself. But the main point that Megan was making is that there have been black officers who have been cleared for shooting unarmed white victims. And true enough, these are two stories. And also, she brought up the case in South Carolina where a white officer was charged for shooting an unarmed victim who happened to be black. His name was Sean Gorbett, and the victim's name was LeVar Jones. And Officer Gorbett was fired from the police department. He's awaiting trial. Now, there's a possibility this could turn out to be another Zimmerman where he's found not guilty. Who knows? We'll see what happens along the way. But just keep your eye on that case. Let's see if Sean Gorbett is found not guilty or found guilty for killing LeVar Jones. So, alright. So, like I said, Megan has brought up the argument that there have been black officers who have shot white victims. But what's also interesting about all this is that I guess some things that I would like to point out is that white people have always asked, where are the Al Sharptons? Where are the Jesse Jacksons when it comes to black officers shooting white victims? Or where are they when it comes to black on black crimes? And it's almost like that's the pot calling the kettle black, because, when it comes to white on black crimes, or when black officers shoot white victims, or white on white crime, where are your white reverends who's protesting or speaking out about how this is an outrage? I mean, you guys have your Alex Jones, your Rush Limbaughs, your Sean Hannitys, your Bill O'Reillys, your popular conservative right wing pundits. I mean, why aren't they raising any concerns? Why does Al Sharpton and Jesse Jackson have to speak out against black on black or black on white crimes? I mean, does your white reverends, your white pastors, do they do that? And why can't they? I mean, honestly, no one is stopping them from protesting whenever a black officer shoots an unarmed white man, or whenever there's a black on white crime. Or do they even, or do they even speak out whenever there's a white on white crime? Just something I just thought about. And here's another thing: if people are upset about how cases like the Colliers and the Whiteheads, how they're not garnering national attention when it comes to black officers shooting them, then why haven't you taken that outrage towards Fox News and other right-wing media outlets who have not brought these stories on a national scale? I mean, they don't talk about it every day like they did the Benghazi situations, right? Or the immigration, so you can't really fault the liberal media for making the Mike Browns or Trayvon Martin cases into something that has gotten national attention when you don't take that same outrage towards your right-wing media. I mean, again, black people are not stopping you from doing so. We don't own the media. We don't own CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, the Nightly News, any other national news outlets that's on these channels. But what I found within the conversation is that both of them are in agreement that regardless of race, regardless of your ethnicity, when it comes to being the cop, you are getting immunity for killing unarmed civilians. We've seen it, like I said, we've seen it with Eric Garner. We've seen it with Mike Brown. We've seen it with Trayvon Martin. We've seen it also with the white victims, Gil Collar and James Whitehead. And there's plenty more out there, but I'm not going to sit here and name them all. But those are just a few that I'm somewhat familiar with. We have seen that police officers are getting away with killing unarmed civilians, whether black and white. But this is another problem that I have, is that there are people who criticize blacks for protesting. You know, they're like, wow, why are they making such a big deal about white officers killing black guys, killing black men, but yet they ignore all the black on black crimes? But see, here's the thing though. And also, kudos to Michael Eric Dyson, who fucking, I feel, dismantled former Mayor Giuliani when he brought up about, what about black on black crime? And to this point, Eric Dyson was like, well, these black offenders are charged for the crime. They are punished for the crime. So, but however, when you look at police officers, they're not charged for killing unarmed civilians. They're getting away with taking the life of a human being. That is the issue that people seem to ignore because they want to throw race into the equation from both sides. You know, you have your Al Sharptons who've made it about race. You have white people who also make it about race. The reason why blacks make it about race, because whites have always made it about race. Let's keep it real. And you know, whites make it about race because why are they pointing the fingers? Why are they wagging their fingers towards black people, talking about, why are you guys making it a big deal when white police officers shoot black victims? Well, hell, what's stopping you from raising concerns when black police officers shoot white victims? But like I said before, like I said earlier, let's just take race out of the equation. Because we can admit to the fact that police officers, regardless of race, are getting away with shooting unarmed civilians. So my question is to the critics of those who criticize blacks for protesting, why aren't you standing out there? Why aren't you out there with your signs screaming no justice, no peace? Because obviously you're not getting any justice and you're not getting any peace when it comes to victims like James Whitehead and Gil Collar. So don't just shame blacks for doing something that they feel is an injustice. Police officers, regardless of race, are getting away with killing civilians. That's the message that it should be put out there. There are those who make it about race, but we're not going to get anywhere if we always make it about race. We see it time and time again. When you take race out of the picture, you see that there is a bigger issue that's going on. I can say with the Eric Garner case, I'm proud to see that when it comes to the protest, it's not just one group that's protesting. It's all groups. It's like a melting pot. It's black, white, Asian, Hispanic. They're all out there protesting because they do see the injustice. The camera was right there in your face. You saw what happened. That's why people are protesting, because they see the injustice. It's not about race, but the only difference is the victim happens to be an African American. That's the only difference. If the situation was, I honestly believe if it was any other race, people would have protested regardless, even when the grand jury didn't indict the person. I really do feel that way. But we'll never know until we see a situation like this happens, where a bunch of black police officers put a big white guy in the chokehold and someone's actually filming that. That is when we can really determine if it's not about race. Let's quit making this about race. White people need to quit wagging their fingers, shaking their heads at blacks for protesting whenever there's police officers who shoot black victims, because there is a legitimate reason why they're raising such a concern. Because the people who have been sworn to serve and protect are out here getting away with shooting unarmed civilians. No one has a problem when officers shoot people who have actually committed heinous, violent crimes. But they're speaking out against those who haven't really committed crimes. They've just been shot unfairly. and then the officers are getting away with it. White people really shouldn't be wagging their fingers, especially when they bring up cases where there have been black officers who have been found not guilty for shooting white civilians. I don't understand why you can't get on the same page. You can't get on the same page with black people who are pissed off or who are very concerned with officers getting away with shooting unarmed civilians. Because as Fox News have pointed out, as Megyn Kelly have pointed out, which I'm sure happens to be your favorite network, have pointed out that black officers have gotten away with shooting white victims. So why aren't you out there protesting as well? The fact of the matter is, it has absolutely nothing to do with race. It has to do with the system that is letting their officers, police officers, people who are above the law, who are supposed to serve and protect, are getting away with murdering unarmed civilians. Why aren't you out there with your signs screaming out "No justice, no peace," white people? Just white people who criticize blacks for protesting, for speaking out. You guys should be in the same boat too, am I right? I'm going to end this video by saying this, is that people shouldn't wag their fingers or shake their head and discuss at blacks for their outrage for protesting. Because the truth of the matter is, there is a legitimate reason why they're protesting. It may, like I said, you may don't want to look at it as it being a racial thing, but it is a thing. But it is a problem where the system is letting police officers get free when it comes to killing unarmed civilians. You really shouldn't be in disgust. You really should be disgusted at black people for doing so, when Fox News and the pundits on Fox News have pointed out that there have been black officers who have shot unarmed white civilians. So if that's really the case, then you guys should be out there with your signs too, protesting. You should speak on the outrage, because if it's not about race, then all races of people should speak out about how unarmed civilians are getting shot down by police officers who are later been found not guilty or not indicted by the grand jury. People shouldn't wag their fingers, shake their heads when black people protest or speak outrage when it comes to officers getting away with killing black victims, killing black unarmed victims. They should try to understand where they're coming from. When it comes to black on black crime, the protest and the outrage is there. It's just that the media, which is controlled by whites, regardless of their political affiliations, they are not going into the black neighborhoods and filming the outrage. They're not filming the Stop the Violence concerts or the stop the violence events, or going into these churches where they're speaking to the brothers, speaking to the sisters. They're not doing that. Whenever there is a black on black crime, they're not filming the outrage that goes on in the neighborhoods. But it happens. And sometimes by the time they do go down there to film it, the case has already been closed, because within 48 hours, the detectives, the police department have already caught the black offender. And he's later charged and he's found guilty of the crime. People have an outrage because police officers are getting away with killing black people, unlike black offenders not getting away with killing black victims. I also just find it funny how people wag their fingers, shake their heads, and discuss when they talk about black people always making it about race. They always make it, everything's not always about black and white. But that's kind of like the pot calling the kettle black in a sense. Because you can't sit here and say black people make it about race when there have been white people who have made it about race as well. When it comes to police officers so-called supposed to be doing their job, you giving your donations to Officer Wilson, the Darren Wilson, to the George Zimmermans, but yet why haven't you give those same donations out to Officer Alston and Officer Arnold? I mean, if it was all about race, wouldn't black people have given donations to Officer Alston and Officer Arnold for shooting unarmed white civilians? You can't say we don't have the money, because, black people have been known to spend billions of dollars on merchandise. So we have the money. We just spending on bullshit. So you can't say that we don't have money, because obviously we do. So if it was really about race, wouldn't black people have given donations to Officer Alston and Officer Arnold? If it was really about race, wouldn't black people be on the internet posting in the comment sections of different media outlets congratulating Officer Alston and Officer Arnold for shooting unarmed white civilians, the way white people have congratulated Darren Wilson and Zimmerman for shooting Trayvon Martin and Mike Brown? If it was really about race, wouldn't you have seen black people assassinate the characters of the white victims, Gil Collar and James Whitehead? If white people are shaking their heads and wagging their fingers at the liberal media for making cases like the Trayvon Martins and the Mike Browns and the Eric Garners, putting it on national scale, then shouldn't you be wagging your fingers, shaking your heads at conservative right-wing media for not covering the cases of black officers shooting white victims or black-on-white crime? So honestly and truthfully, when you shake your fingers and when you wag your fingers and you shake your head, could you do me a favor? Could you stand in front of a mirror and do that? Basically, don't tell black people they're making it about race when white people are making it about race too. Don't wag your fingers or shake your heads at blacks protesting or speaking outrage when officers are getting away with killing black victims, because it's nowhere in comparison to black offenders who have not gotten away with killing black victims. They've been charged for their crimes, unlike officers who haven't. And lastly, the black on black crime argument is very weak when it comes to officers who are white shooting unarmed victims who are black, because the difference between that is black offenders aren't given donations. Black offenders are caught within 48 hours. Black offenders are charged and found guilty of the crime and have been given a sentence. Whereas police officers who are white are given donations, are not caught within 48 hours, or not being put behind bars awaiting trial, don't get indicted, or if they are charged for the crime and they have a trial, they end up being found not guilty. So how can you really wag your fingers, shake your head, and discuss at black people for having an outrage? Their reasons are justified. You can't fault them when the media refuses to go into the neighborhoods whenever there is a black on black crime and film the outrage, film the protest. But like I said, most of the times, by the time they do get down there to see it, the black offender is already caught. Or let's just be quite honest, the media could care less about black on black crime, just as the media could care less about white on white crime. As much as white on white crime that's happening, you don't see it on a national scale either. How can you fault black people for the media not going into the neighborhoods and seeing their outrage and the protest whenever there is a black on black crime, but they're there whenever there's a white on black crime or a white police officer shooting black victims? People really need to get their stuff together before they start want to bring up talking points, because most of the talking points that they speak on is pure bullshit. Well, that's all the time I have for you guys today. I hope you enjoyed this video. This is Macadon. Until next time, POP, holding it down. Pimp Squad, baby.